putting that and that hand. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach this week. We're talking about the sutta out of the big book, one of the big books of suttas, the Dhammacakkavapattana Sutta, which is notionally Buddha's first teaching, and it means turning the wheel of Dharma. The last couple of weeks we've just been reading from it. I'm going to recap and then quickly get to the end, and then I'm just going to recover some of the stuff we talked about, and then talk about the rest. So where we have been, Buddha woke up and he came back and taught the 5 mendicants, who are the people he'd been practicing with before. And the core of the teaching was these 2 extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness, which too, the pursuit of sensual happiness and sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, etc., and the pursuit of self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, unbeneficial. Avoiding these 2 extremes, the Buddha awoke to the middle path. So there's this, it's not a compromise, it's avoiding the extremes, and he awoke to the middle path. And then he talks about, so what is this middle path that I awoke to? It's the 4 noble truths. The noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness, death, union with what is pleasing, etc. The origin of suffering, which is craving, cessation from suffering, and the path to the cessation, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. And then we get to where we've not been before, which is the 3 turnings. So the 3 turnings, he says, the noble truth of suffering. This is the noble truth of suffering in regard to things not heard before. There arose vision, knowledge, wisdom, etc. The noble truth of suffering is to be fully understood. That's the 2nd turning. First is this is the truth. The 2nd is it is to be fully understood. And the 3rd is it has been fully understood. So these are the obligations or the responsibilities, if you will, associated with the 4 noble truths. There's a verb associated with each of them. Understand, and then the cause of suffering is to be abandoned. The cessation of suffering has to be realized, and the path is to be developed. So these are the 4 words. We understand the suffering itself. We abandon the cause. We abandon craving, basically. We realize, and there's 3 turnings. This is the truth. This is the realizing, and now it has been fully realized. And then we develop the path. So he talks about all of that. And then he says, until I'd done this, well, he says, I can't find the words, but until I'd done this, I did not claim to have been released from suffering. And then he says, unshakable is the liberation of my mind. This is my last birth. Now there is no more renewed existence. And then there's a whole lot of jubilation. All the gods and so forth get all excited and throw flower petals in the air and dance and sing. And then it says the wheel of the Dharma had been set in motion. And there's these cries. And then Konanda, it's in here somewhere. Konanda, who is one of the 5, understood. And that's cause for jubilation as well. So that's the story. Big story. Big book of stories. So what I want to do, I want to go back to the beginning here a little bit. We talked about the beginning, but there's a few things as I've been working through this that I really want to emphasize. So the story here is Buddha, he practiced with one teacher, and they were basically jhana practice. It was absorption and concentration practice. And that brought it brought great bliss, great joy, and substantial release from suffering. But there was still an edge there. There was still not what he wanted. So he recognized, and the teacher told him he'd got all of his teachings, and it wasn't enough. It wasn't what Buddha was looking for. And Buddha realized this. So he went on to another guy, went a little further. Technically, the first one was the third immaterial jhana, no thing, the realm of no thing, and then it was beyond feeling and perception. But it still wasn't complete release from suffering, so it still wasn't what he wanted. And that's when he went off and he really worked hard. He concentrated, he sat, and he starved himself, just became an ascetic. And so then he realized that wasn't working and he came back. So you've got this guy who woke up, which means there's nothing there anymore. This waking up, it's complete release. It's complete release. Feelings arise, but they don't land. There's no traction. Nothing sticks. It's complete release. So you've got this complete release, and it's like, wow. But there's an awareness there that brings it back and says, okay, so what am I going to do with this? This is incredible. This is something I should make available to everybody, but how on earth do I do that? And so there's the stories of Mara visiting and all, the temptations, basically. And he sat there and he figured out what to do. So the Noble Eightfold Path, if you think about it, he had been doing concentration jhana practice, which is the noble, which is the eighth of the steps. I mean, that's just concentration. That's what he'd been working on. And he realized that the reason he wasn't getting where he needed to get to, ultimately with his last step on his own, was because he weakened the body. So he had to bring a fuller practice around this for it to work. So that's the cultivation of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's creating a practice environment within which this deep settling, this deep calming, and this really profound insight can be cultivated. And the right, they all hang out together. I said this before, but it's the word for the Noble Eightfold Path is the Attavangika Magga. Atta is 8. Anga is limb. And Ben was talking, it's Ashtanga. Ashtanga yoga is 8-limbed yoga. It's the same word, Attavangika. And the Ika is the fold, right? So it's 8-limbed, and the limbs, they're branches off the same thing. They interact in a different way. They feed off the same water system. They grow together. There's something much more organic and interconnected about this system than 8 steps on a path. So Buddha developed this system of 8 that work together to take us into this place where calming and settling can happen to the extent that this deep insight can occur. And that insight is what's required in order to see through. So you've got to bring awareness with the calming and the insight, the calming. So the 3 turnings of the wheel. The first turning, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause, the truth of cessation. This is the mundane level. There's the 3 levels called the mundane, the transcendent, and then the complete or final. Mundane, transcendent, complete or final. So those are just words, but I'll talk about what they mean. So you know what I'm talking about when I use the words. The mundane, this is the realm of bells and that hurts, right? This is the realm of karma. This is the realm of action. This is the realm of beings. And the noble truths are how we practice it. Oh, there's a piece I missed, which is very important. So the reason we do practice is because the Buddha's teaching was compelling. We believe it. There's a word we don't like to use in Buddhism, which is faith or conviction. And it's really important. We don't like to use that because it's got connotations of other faiths and other practices that are kind of, we don't want to go there, right? But it's important and it is true. If we didn't have some kind of belief system around this, we wouldn't bother showing up to practice. So recognizing that and figuring out what that is and what that's about is kind of important. So the belief system is the teachings make sense. We've seen people who practice them and can see external evidence that they work. And as we engage with them ourselves, there's incremental progress happening and we feel that kind of work. So there's an overall structure within which they make sense, and we can have a conviction that these are truths. But there is a belief system here. There is a faith or a conviction around this. So with that conviction, we then jump into this mundane level, which is working in a very practical way with karma. Karma is, cause and effect. It's in Buddhist terms, there's rebirth moment to moment as well as over lifetimes. But it's recognizing that skillful actions have positive consequences and unskillful actions have negative consequences. If you think about it, the Four Noble Truths are basically about skillful and unskillful actions. Unskillful actions are the cause of suffering. Second Noble Truth. The result of unskillful actions is suffering. First Noble Truth. Skillful actions direct towards the end of suffering. Fourth Noble Truth. The result, cessation of suffering. Third Noble Truth. So the Four Noble Truths are really a detailed codification of skillful and unskillful actions and consequences. So we start to work at this mundane level with figuring out skillful and unskillful actions, cultivating skillful, and moving away, suppressing is a word I don't like, but moving away from and not giving rise to unskillful actions. And in ourselves, seeing the consequences of our actions so we can filter them. The transcendent level of this practice, so that's the practice. The second one is must be fully realized, must be fully developed, must be fully abandoned, etc. At that level, that's moving away from the way of the world as we normally interact with it to, for example, I've got a little pain in my thigh right here because I've been sitting for the better part of an hour. Those are words that function at the mundane level, but there is a sensation. What is that sensation? It's not what I think it is. It's just sensation. And I can look at that in terms of the phenomenon of sensation, the phenomenon of this thing, rather than the content. So the word pain goes away. It's just an experience. And I can look at the arising of that and I can try and see, where is that? Well, to say it's in my leg actually doesn't make any sense, really, because it's not. It's arising out of a whole bunch of stuff, and without this interpreting it, it wouldn't be there at all. But I can't say it's here. Where is it? So there's this phenomenon, and in the transcendental or the transcendent level, we're looking at these phenomena at a different level. And then at that final complete level, which is the third turning, they have been fully realized, they have been fully abandoned. At that level, there's letting go of the Noble Eightfold Path itself, because you can't even hold on to that. They are the raft, and it's the metaphor of the raft which we have heard. But when you get to that final level, you actually have to put that metaphor into practice and let go of the raft. The teachings themselves have no reality. They're just practical. They're just to help us cross the river. So that final level is letting go of them. So within all of this, as you can see, it's staged, and there's an inherent challenge in the structure of the book, which you can see is really big, and I have 5 of those on my shelves at home, and there's more of them. Because these are not organized in the way I just talked about. These teachings are lots of little ones scattered all over, and there is order in there, but it's not ordered in this system. It's the handful of leaves, but he saw the whole universe, understood everything, but that's not helpful. So he figured out the handful of things that are useful and came back and taught those. But somebody will find these ones useful, and somebody will find other ones useful, and somebody will find other ones useful. So he's teaching that's different stuff to different people that's useful. And in some places he's going to be teaching some fairly mundane teachings, and other ones he's going to be teaching advanced teachings, and then other ones he's going to be teaching really advanced ones. So he's dancing up and down the spectrum of there's no self, there's a self, that hurts, right? I mean, there's just, so you hear people get into, shall we just say, discussions about non-self and no self. A lot of those discussions are utterly misled and misleading discussions because they're two people talking at different levels in this practice structure. And they're talking right past each other because they're just talking at different levels. And it creates a lot of challenge as you play with this. And it requires a lot of skill to figure out when you're talking with each other at what level you're talking and make sure you're talking coherently in that same structure. So make sure I'm not missing anything I wanted. There's a couple of other things I want to get to. Okay, so Kondana, who's one of the folks who was listening to this first teaching, understood. So he understood in the language of these sutras, that means he became a stream enterer. So there is a point, and this shows up all over the place in the Pure Land teachings. The idea of the Pure Land is there is this Pure Land, and if we have a certain level of conviction, it's based on conviction and a fairly simple practice. But if we have this level of conviction, we will be reborn in the Pure Land. And it doesn't mean we're enlightened and we're Buddhas. The idea of rebirth in the Pure Land is it is a land of non-regression. There's no falling back. We're not going to be reborn into this world of samsara. We'll keep on being reborn there until we finally wake up, and it's incremental progress until we wake up. Non-regression. So it's like one of my favorite examples, you probably all know it, well, not everybody does, but most of you know, the metal puzzles where you got two pieces of metal that are twisted metal and they're together, and you untwist the metal and suddenly it comes apart. There's no going back from that. You know how to do that. It's just no returning. Once you've seen it, you don't go back. And in the same way, there's a profound level of insight where, profound is relative, there's a level of insight where that pain in my leg, you just see through to, it's not pain, there's sensation, label-less sensation, that doesn't have a story attached to it because I've not added a story. The story is something I add to it. So there's a label-less sensation that doesn't have a location, that comes out of nowhere and goes back to nowhere. If that is realized just intuitively, there's no going back from that. And so there are these stages of non-regression, and these are the milestones of non-returner, once-returner, stream enterer. They're markers of this non-regression. And then the only other thing I really want to mention here is there's a recurring thing that happens at the end. All rakshas and demons, and everybody all cheered, and all the gods and somebody cheered, and then the earth shook. I can't find it, but there's a sentence in there that says the whole world shook. These phrases show up in a lot of the Mahayana sutras, the Lotus Sutra and the Prajnaparamita Sutras and so forth, when Buddha delivers a particularly profound teaching, or when somebody wakes up, the whole universe shakes. And there's a sense here that's being delivered in this teaching that this is a really big deal, that this hadn't happened before. Got all these people practicing, nobody'd woken up before. So the subsequent schools would say, well, in this world system maybe, but in other world systems. But nobody had actually had this transcending experience before of just total release. And that changed everything. Because with that total release, we now have access to a body of teachings, but the rest of us can do it. So that's the cause for this great celebration, and the earth rocking and shaking and flashing lights and all the rest of it. So that's the teaching. And then you've got all of these big books, lots and lots more stuff, which explains how that works, because it is the handful of leaves. It's really gappy stuff. The teaching is just full of gaps. It's not a coherent philosophical system. If you wanted to pick it apart, you could find all sorts of things. Buddha didn't describe stuff. He showed how it works. So in here, I've closed the page now. What number is it? Did I write it down? 5611. So we're going to go. This is the noble truth of suffering. What's suffering? Birth is suffering. Old age is suffering. Illness is suffering. Death is suffering. Union with what is displeasing is suffering. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Not getting what one wants. In brief, the five aggregates. What the heck are the five aggregates? Subject to clinging are suffering. He's not described what it is. He's not told us what suffering actually is. He's explained the experience of suffering and given us pointers. And that's the way this works. It's not a philosophical system in that sense, and it's not complete. So the rest of these vast array of texts are helping us get closer to that, because it's entirely experiential. It's not theoretical, it's experiential. And he keeps on bringing us back to our experience to help us use our experience to navigate this process. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to be relying a lot on this wonderful book called On the Path, which is by Tanisaro Bhikkhu, he has a monastery out in California, and he writes some wonderful texts, just amazing teacher. And what he does is he's got a staggering knowledge of the Pali Canon and how it all fits together. And so he structures readings from the Pali Canon and then puts like a little treatise on top of a whole bunch of teachings, and another treatise and a whole bunch of teachings. So this is about the Noble Eightfold Path. I'm going to be relying on this. But over the next few weeks, we'll step through the Noble Eightfold Path and draw from the sutras to understand the limbs in the Eightfold Path more thoroughly. So with that, let me push this button again.